everyone. Welcome back to our High Noon series. This is number 4 in the series, and we're talking about how to build highly available MySQL clusters. And we're going to deploy these Geo-Scale and also be able to implement DR. And today we're going to be looking at Azure Database for MySQL. And as usual, we're going to compare it to Continuent Tungsten clusters. And our goal is really building a MySQL cluster at the Geo-Scale, whether that's multi-region, multi-cloud, or hybrid cloud. And we want this to be highly available and, again, geo-deployed. My name is Matthew Lang, and I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Continuent. And a little bit about me. I'll get back to that picture in a second, but I've always been into Linux, MySQL, and cloud. I actually started using Linux in the 90s, and I've been using it for my professional career ever since. I really enjoy working at startups, and I've been fortunate enough to work in several startups where there's been exponential growth in employees and sales, and whether that's in automotive, steel, medical, and now tech industries. So I've done MySQL DBA work. I've been a Linux sysadmin. I've been a site reliability engineer and a cloud architect. And one of the more interesting things that I've done is I made a replication system for a proprietary database. And that's actually still in use at that company. They have not replaced it, even though I am no longer there. And on the weekends, I like to go and play out, do some concerts or something like that. A little hard right now, but hopefully soon we'll all be back out and I'll be able to do my thing again. So a little bit about Continuent before we move on. We are the MySQL availability company. And let me just talk briefly. How do we fit in? Why are we in authority to talk about this? Well, we've been around since 2004. We've seen open source uh, really take on a life of its own, and we've seen cloud computing rise. And we've really been at the forefront of the MySQL market. We've witnessed MySQL become extremely widely deployed. And in the beginning, there really was no high availability solutions for MySQL, let alone any sort of clustering solutions or Geo-Scale solutions. And that's where we come in. We do high availability, clustering, and Geo-Scale. And again, we've been doing this since 2004. So we're not a huge company. We're not the biggest, and that's really not our goal. Uh, we just want to be the best at this. And again, that's the best at clustering, highly availability, and geo-deployed, highly available MySQL. So maybe you've seen the previous High Noon webinar, but if not, what we want to do is look at several solutions to deploy MySQL at the geo scale and look at highly available solutions. So what we're looking for is rapid failover in the local network so that we have high availability for our applications. We would like to have our applications geographically distributed so that we have low latency data replication with a consolidated view, consolidated management view. Uh, Obviously, we want good performance, fast local response times for our read traffic. Um, and we want to deploy not just at a geo scale, but we want to have active MySQL primaries in multiple regions. So there would be an active database in each region that we deploy in, or each site, each cloud provider, whatever it may be. Of course, if we have an existing application, we really don't want to change the application code. We want to be able to deploy our solution without changing our applications. One other thing too is to deploy complex schema changes without taking down our applications. This has traditionally been a challenge really with any solution. So we want to see, how can we do that? What solutions are going to allow us to do that? And then also too, let's try to avoid provider lock-in. If we're locked into one provider, obviously we don't have choice, and it could be really expensive in the long run, in the future for our application. So, and also too, when we're talking about MySQL, we really mean MySQL, MariaDB, and Percona Server in any version. So let's get into the High Noon series. This is a new series where we are comparing other MySQL clustering products to Tungsten Clustering. And we're going to look at a bunch of products. And what we do is we do a deep dive with each product and we rank them and we figure out what features they have, what they don't, and how well each feature works. And we're able to roll them up into kind of a scoring system, right? From 1 to 5 in each of these areas. And when you're looking at a package for an enterprise cluster, these are pretty much, the main features that you're going to be looking for. Continuous operations, right? You want your cluster to be running, your application to be online 24/7. You'll probably want to be able to scale it as well. Hopefully, you're going to have an increase in traffic, increase in business, or more drive to your website. So you want your backend cluster to be able to handle that. Um, are you going to be able to do a geographic deployment, right? Or a geo deployment? Or is it just a single region only? So we'll look at that as well. And then how is the overall performance? Are we going to take a performance hit by putting in a cluster, or are we actually going to be able to improve the performance of our application with our cluster? And then what is our application see when it connects to our cluster? Does it have to be modified? Is there some sort of change that needs to happen? Or can we just install a cluster and our applications are going to work fine? And that's what we mean by transparency. And then, of course, security is always a big issue. And so we'll definitely look at that. And that's something that's coming up more and more. So we definitely want to make sure that all of our products do support good security. And then, of course, once we get this deployed, it might be a complex system. We need a good tool to manage the entire deployment and the entire topology. And with that, too, we need to be able to monitor what's happening within our cluster so we can react if things don't look right. And then lastly, once we have our complete topology, our complete deployment all set up and running, how easy is it to replicate our data out or get our data out and load it into some analytics tool where we can have a look later and run complex analysis on our data? So one other thing too, really important, is support. Um, there are always going to be questions, always going to be issues, or maybe something that you just don't understand. And so, where will you get your support? Some options are online forums, right? Maybe not the best place or the most up to date information. The information in a forum isn't necessarily verified. um, Perhaps it's an email system, right? Where you email support and then the next day you'll get an answer and you'll reply to that and wait another day for an answer. Or maybe you actually get a live person, an engineer with experience. That's obviously worth a whole lot more because you can get your questions answered much more quickly and get it directly from the source. So we'll see how all these solutions compare with support. And then, of course, we talk about intangibles, right? We're clustering MySQL. So, what versions of MySQL do we support, right? Or which ones does a particular solution not support? So, that's also important if you need certain features in a certain version of MySQL. And when we say MySQL, that could be MySQL Enterprise, MariaDB, Percona, any one of those variants. Platform's important. Are you going to be deploying in the cloud, hybrid cloud, maybe on site? So whatever solution we pick has to support our target deployment. And then product maturity, I think that goes without saying. The more mature a product, the more time it has to have bugs worked out and features put in as well. And then with all this said and done, what's the total cost of ownership, right? And how much does the physical software or all the pieces cost? But also, What about support? And what about man hours and learning the product and, really time spent on implementation, right? And that's what we call total cost of ownership. And then lastly, what we'll be looking at are the various use cases. So we see right here, we can have a quick look. We have pretty good support for HA. Each product handles it a little differently, some better than others. And we'll look at how they handle HA. DR, or disaster recovery, not everyone supports that, but it might be something that you need. You may want to avoid a catastrophic situation in a particular region, and you may need to fail over to another region or another site. Zero downtime maintenance is also important. And I think every DBA has gone through this where there has to be some major maintenance. How is that going to impact the application? Or does it even impact the application at all? And again, that flows with continuous operations, right? We need our application to be up, especially for large enterprise applications. We can't afford downtime. And that includes maintenance. Okay. And then what about some other features like having multiple primaries? Is that something that we want to have? How about a geo-deployed active passive cluster? So we can fail over and we can also fail back and we can leverage the DR site maybe for reads. Getting even more complex active clusters, right? Deploy a Geo-Scale topology where you have multiple active clusters and all replicating to each other and all in sync. And this goes, again, leads into Geo-Scale clusters, right? Can we deploy globally and have our applications close to our end users? So let's get into Azure Database for MySQL. Some of the characteristics, and this is kind of an interesting one because there are actually like two versions. It's what they call the flexible server, which is in preview, and then single server, that's not in preview. Single server is exactly what it sounds like. It's a single MySQL instance. It can have read replicas, but there's no replica for failing over. What they say is it's still highly available. And what it looks like happens is if something happens to that instance, another one is restarted. So there's definitely going to be some downtime if something happens to that main server. Flexible server actually does have a standby available, and that would be for failover. So we're going to try to talk about flexible server the most here, since that's really what provides the best availability. But we'll touch on both of them because there are features in each that the other doesn't have. And again, just a reminder that flexible server is still in preview mode. But whichever one you choose, you do get managed deployment of your MySQL database as expected in any cloud provider. Flexible backups, again, something that we've come to see from most of the cloud providers. You can retain up to 35 daily backups. That's not really a lot. It's really just over a month, but they do give you that facility to do on demand as well as point in time. And you can restore point in time backups to a new instance, which is also a good feature. Again, automatic failover, that's with flexible server in preview. And what that does is it sets up a standby instance with synchronous replication. So that instance should be up to date and failover would happen automatically. The standby instance costs the same price as the primary instance. You can have up to 10 read replicas, and that just uses regular MySQL native replication. That's asynchronous. And they do provide encryption of all in-flight and at-rest traffic, extremely important. Everyone is looking at their security, and they need to tighten their security controls. So a little bit more into the replication. Well, let's look at the standby instance. Again, that's with the flexible server model. It's a special instance. You can have one of them, and it acts as a failover candidate. It can't be used for reads or anything like that. It's simply behind the scenes, awaiting a failure. It has synchronous replication from the primary, so it's up to date. And like we mentioned, its price as the same as the primary instance. Now, a read replica, those are available in both flexible server and single server. You can have up to 10, and they can be used for reads, but they cannot be used for failover. It's going to require binary logging on the primary, and that's expected. It uses asynchronous replication, and it's really MySQL native replication behind the scene. And Microsoft says that openly on their documentation. Again, it's priced the same as a standalone MySQL instance, and you can connect to the read replicas by using the IP address. So a cross-region replica, or cross-region read replica, again, is just a special read replica that's in a different region. Now, the only thing about that is it's only available in the single server. So if you want a cross-region read replica, you're going to have to give up failover. So if we want to do a multi-site deployment using Azure Database for MySQL, well, again, we have to use single server, right? Because read replicas are not supported in flexible server. And again, we'll be giving up failover for that. But to do it is pretty easy. We create a primary instance, and then at the portal, we find the menu under settings, replication, and do add replica. Pretty simple. Uh, when we add the first read replica, the instance is going to restart. So the database will be down, and that must be planned. And just to note, you can't create a replica of a replica. You create a replica of the primary. And then to promote a read replica, and it's really the same process, whether it's a local read replica or cross-region, we need to stop replication to the replica so we can delink it from the source. And Microsoft says that that takes about 2 minutes to complete. And then we simply point applications to the newly promoted read replica. That's all there is to it. And now it's its own standalone instance, right? So if we had other read replicas provisioned, they would need to be reprovisioned from this new promoted read replica as a source. So the limitations, this is, again, it's a little complex. Are we talking about single server or flexible server? But when we talk about cross-region replication or failover, so first of all, single server has no failover, right? It's just going to try to restart your instance. Flexible server, again, is in preview, but it'll have a standby replica for failover, but you cannot do cross-region replication. So again, it's a choice. When we're talking about a geo deployment, we really can't use flexible server. We have to use single server, but we lose failover. With single server, if we have a standby, or sorry, with flexible server, if we have a standby write-intensive workloads, may have a performance impact because of synchronous replication. And we only get one of those failover candidates, what's called a standby, in the cluster. So we really have a choice between, two AZs at that point for failover. Very limited cross-region support. It's not available in flexible server, only in single server. And there's no MySQL proxy included with Azure Database. And that might be important for when you want to do, say, load balancing of your reads, read-write splitting, or even just a simple failover, so that your applications don't get disconnected and they know where the point for when the failover happens. Using a cross-region replica and promoting it to primary, that makes it a standalone instance. So if you had other read replicas provisioned, they must be reprovisioned now using this newly promoted read replica as a source, right? Pricing, we all know, pay for what you use. If you use 5 times more, then you'll pay 5 times more. It's completely linear. To use the read replicas, applications need to be aware of who the read replicas are and be able to direct traffic to them. So there could be some additional logic that must be coded into your applications. And then there's going to be outages related to database maintenance and schema changes. and you really can't get away from any of the database maintenance. It happens automatically. So how do we approach building a better MySQL Geo-Scale solution? Well, here at Continuent, we have our proven solution, Tungsten Clustering, right? This provides continuous MySQL operations, so highly available, uh, zero downtime maintenance, so we can do OS patching, MySQL patching, maybe upgrading to the latest version with no downtime. We fully support geo-distributed MySQL clusters, and really we accelerate on that, and we'll see that in a few minutes. And along those lines, we support cloud, multi-cloud, or hybrid cloud. So you can deploy in two cloud providers if you would like, or deploy in a cloud and on-prem at a geo scale. Okay. Included is the Tungsten connector, which is an intelligent proxy for MySQL. It speaks to MySQL protocol, and it can handle read-write splitting automatically, so no changes to your application. Or if you have this functionality in your application, great, we can leverage it. And we support MySQL off the shelf. No changes to your application. Just use whatever MySQL version you'd like. And of course, as I mentioned, that includes MariaDB and Percona Server. Let's have a look at what we call active passive clustering, right? So we can scale a cluster to multiple regions, multiple data centers, or multiple clouds, or a combination of all of that. Uh, and we really don't care if it's what cloud provider you use, if you're going to deploy it on a VM or directly on the servers. We run on really anything. Uh, and this particular topology is active passive, which means there's one site, one single site that is active and has a primary, which is a read and write database. And then all other sites are replicated from that primary cluster. And we can manage this cluster from any node within the cluster. And we can also fail over or move the primary from one site to another site. So if we have, say, in one region, maybe an outage, or we're going to be doing some maintenance on that region, we just fail over and activate the other region to become active. And then when the first region comes back online, it catches up with replication and gets added back in the cluster. And we can switch back or fail back with a single command. So just another kind of contrast. This is active clustering. And really, Continuent is the only one doing this right now. So this is where, again, multiple clouds, data centers, whatever hardware, but all clusters are active. So each active cluster has a primary that you can read and write from. And with this, you can deploy your clusters close to your users so they get the best performance. Your local users can read and write to a local database. But all these clusters are in sync with each other, and each one is active. And in a failover situation or a failure of a single site, we just redirect the traffic to another site within the cluster, and we're good to go. Again, everything is replicated between each other. And if that failed site, when it comes back online, we just add it back into the cluster and replication catches up automatically. How about, we mentioned zero downtime maintenance. Uh, how would we do that? Well, let's say we wanted to upgrade MySQL. So one thing with Tungsten clustering is you can mix MySQL versions, which within the cluster, and we fully support this. And this is really an avenue of when you want to upgrade MySQL. You can take a replica, remove it from the cluster, we call it shun, go ahead and upgrade MySQL, and return the node back to the cluster. And we're good. Replication catches back up. And if for some reason there's an error, we can just discard that node and reprovision it in a couple steps. But assuming most MySQL upgrades do go pretty smoothly, now our replica is upgraded. So we repeat that process for the other replicas and our cluster until finally our primary now is on the old version, but all the replicas are on the new version. So we do a command, we just do a switch. That promotes a replica to primary and the primary to a replica. So now on the old primary, we upgrade MySQL and we're all done. No downtime and application is up. And really, this all happens in the background. And when we talk about transparency, no one notices because this is all happening in the background, leveraging tungsten clustering to allow zero downtime maintenance. So let's circle back to our scorecard and compare tungsten clustering with Azure Database for MySQL. And again, it's a little complicated only because there are two versions of Microsoft Azure for MySQL. The flexible server, which has failover, but that's in preview mode. And then there's the single server, which does support a cross-region replica, but it's not going to have the high availability that we would like because it's going to require an instance restart after detection of a failure. But let's start with zero downtime maintenance. Like most managed services, maintenance is going to require downtime and you're going to have to take a maintenance window. Tungsten clustering is one of our strengths. There's really no downtime for your maintenance operations. And again, high availability, well, again, it's flexible server in preview, it could be up to 2 minutes with a DNS change for Microsoft Azure. Tungsten clustering, again, automatic failover of primary, no problem. Now, DR with an active passive cluster. Again, that comes out of the box with tungsten clustering, but with Azure, this is only going to be in the single server, and we need to stop the primary and repoint apps to our replica. So there's going to be definite, an extended period of outage there. And then when we talk anything with an active cluster, that's not supported in Azure. And with tungsten clustering, that's one of our strengths. Failing back from a DR situation, again, tungsten clustering, that's really quick. It's a single command to fail back. With Azure, like most managed database services, you're going to have to reprovision the failed nodes or the nodes that you took out of commission. Backup and recovery, flexible tools on both. With Microsoft Azure, it's managed, which is pretty helpful, but you really only get like a 35-day max retention. That's not a lot. Now, scalability, and this is leveraging read replicas. So both products do have read replicas, and both versions of Azure support read replicas. Where are these read replicas going to be located? Well, with tungsten clustering, we deploy anywhere. So it could be on site, in another cloud. You can span clouds, multi-cloud. Not a problem there. Obviously, in Azure, read replicas are only going to be in Azure. And they're only going to be in the same region if you choose flexible server for now. Scalability, instance size, really both run with a variety of instances. You just kind of choose the instance that you want and deploy. Auto scaling, it's going to require manual steps in either way to do auto scaling, but you can do it. With tungsten clustering, it's a little easier only because you don't have the downtime associated. Again, that comes back to the zero maintenance downtime. And so this lends itself really well for a pod style architecture with tungsten clustering. With Microsoft Azure, you just simply add read replicas, and that's how you scale. There's really not much you can do beyond that. Now, talking about geographic, really, this is one of the strengths of tungsten clustering. When it comes to deploying your read replicas or deploying active-active clusters or even active-passive geoclusters, um, across regions, across sites, across clouds, that's one of the strengths of tungsten clustering. Microsoft Azure really doesn't handle this, and about the only thing you can do is a simple cross-region replica if you're using the single service mode. Looking to performance, you get quite a few features with tungsten clustering. And a lot of this has to do with the high performance proxy that's included with tungsten clustering. Again, tungsten clustering includes the whole package. So you get stuff like load balancing, smart scale, which is automatic read-write splitting, no changes needed to your applications. Um, both solutions are using asynchronous replication, so there's no performance penalty there. And again, with database performance, really, okay, the asynchronous replication on both read replicas for Azure SQL and for all the replicas in Tungsten clustering. So really, you can tune the database. It's a regular MySQL database, tune it as you've been used to. What you're missing, though, is that kind of connectivity layer in Azure. So you don't get stuff like Smart Scale or load balancing and leveraging those read replicas. How does this look to our application? Tungsten clustering is what we call a bolt-on application. It's native MySQL that you're used to and that you love already, whichever version you like. And your application doesn't need any changes whatsoever. All your applications speak through the connector, which is MySQL compatible. With Azure, there's no connector. And as far as MySQL versions go, well, if you're doing the single server, you get 5.6, 5.7, or 5.8 GA MySQL. If you choose flexible server, that's in preview, right? And that just supports MySQL 5.7. So your application needs no changes, even to take advantage of stuff like read-write splitting and load balancing with tungsten clustering. Uh, and a really important topic, of course, is security. And both of these can really leverage any sort of security or encryption at rest or in flight. And both can be used, say, for compliance like PCI and HIPAA compliance. So how about overall management and monitoring? Well, both of these are really easy to deploy, actually. And cluster management, both are really easy to manage as well. Tungsten clustering has a web-based GUI. The nice thing about that is you can see your entire cluster on one single pane. Um, Microsoft Azure, excellent GUI as well. You'll see a single region at one time. You're not going to see a geo deployment at one time on a single pane. So you have to flip back and forth. Monitoring, Tungsten clustering, GUI-based clustering monitor. Integration was Prometheus, Grafana, and that's getting better every day. With Microsoft Azure, there is monitoring, and it's pretty easy to use. It's a little bit more on the basic side. Same with alerts and notifications. That's constantly being improved with Tungsten clustering, and you can really integrate it with really any notification system. Um, Microsoft Azure does have alerting. It's a little bit more basic, though, what you get. Patching, OS patching, DB patching, Tungsten clustering, no downtime, and there are scripts to assist with that. Azure does that automatically. However, it's going to cause you downtime. So what about if you have clusters, you have MySQL databases, and you'd like to replicate your data into a data lake or into analytics? So how are you going to do that? So the one thing is tungsten clustering, again, it comes with the tungsten replicator, but the tungsten replicator on its own can replicate real time to a bunch of targets. Redshift, Hadoop, Verticas, Elasticsearch, and there's really a bunch of other ones. It also does filtering at table level, schema level, and really it can do transformations as well. So if you want to have a column transform into, say, some other values, it can handle that. And there's really a ton of filtering available. And of course, it's cluster aware. It knows if the primary has failed and if a replica has been promoted to primary. And in Microsoft Azure, basically what you have is MySQL native replication only. You really don't have any of this sort of filtering, and you really don't have what we call heterogeneous replication. That's replicating from MySQL into a different target, say Hadoop or Redshift or something like that. Also really important is support. So if you have issues, where are you going to turn to? Ideally, you don't want to have to write into a forum and wait for an answer and hope that that answer is correct, right? So with Tungsten Clustering, it automatically includes 24/7 support. 100% customer satisfaction, we take that very seriously. And we are fast, and especially for urgent tickets. So if a customer opens an urgent ticket, we respond within 3 minutes on average. And each person in our support team, and really the whole company, has at least 20 years of DBA experience or Linux sysadmin experience or site reliability employment and experience. So with Azure, you get a basic support. You don't get SLA. You can get Premier support, but it's really expensive. Um, and you're only going to get fast response time with the Premier support fee, right? And the support team experience, it's unknown. That first level support, how experienced they are, who you're going to get, and if they really do understand the problem. So obviously with the Premier, there's a better chance of getting someone with more experience, but again, that's really expensive. And you still don't really know what kind of experience the person on the other end really has. Um, Again, how about version support, right? So with Tungsten Clustering, we support MySQL Community, Enterprise, MariaDB, Percona Server, every version up to the latest versions. With Azure, you just get MySQL 5.6, 5.7, and 8.0. And if you go with Flexible Server, you just get 5.7. You don't get Enterprise or MariaDB or Percona Server. So you're kind of limited in your versions of MySQL that you'd like to use. And then where are you going to deploy this? Well, obviously, you're going to deploy Microsoft Azure for MySQL in Azure only, right? There's really no facility to deploy it anywhere else. But Tungsten Clustering can be deployed on-prem in any cloud you want. It can do multi-cloud. So you can deploy a geo-distributed cluster and let's say have one cluster in Google and one in Azure and maybe a third one in AWS. That's fully supported and that all works. And again, same with hybrid cloud, where maybe you're going to deploy on-prem for one cluster, but another cluster will be in the cloud of your choosing, completely supported in Tungsten Clustering. And how long have these solutions been around? Well, Tungsten Clustering has been around for well over 10 years. And we actually have a customer that celebrated their 10-year anniversary with us. And it's complete. And what does that mean? It's a single solution that provides HADR and geoscaling, and it includes all the pieces necessary for that. So again, the management piece, the replication piece, and the proxy piece, and they all work together, right? And fully tested, of course, we process billions of dollars in transactions. And like I said, our customers are with us, some for 5 years, 7 years, because the product works. Microsoft Azure, well, Flexible Server is still in preview, so that your basic failover is still in preview. It has some components, but again, we have a preview version and we don't have a proxy. So we can't really say that this is a mature solution at the moment. And then total cost of ownership. So with Tungsten Clustering, it's kind of an interesting model. We don't care about the instance size. We don't care about how many CPUs, how much RAM. We're not really looking at the deployment on that level. We're really looking at, how much do you have deployed? And it's not going to be a linear pricing as you deploy more clusters. So a customer deploying 100 clusters is definitely not paying 100 times more than a customer deploying one cluster. So it's definitely not a linear increase. Um, but also, too, really important, 24/7 support is included. Again, our engineers have at least 20 years experience uh, with databases and administration. And we have a lot of customers where they really don't have a lot of DBAs or a lot of DBA resources, but yet they're still able to admin tens or hundreds of clusters. With Azure, so it's going to be linear pricing. Deploy uh, 10 more clusters, it's going to be 10 times more the cost. 24/7 support, it's going to be a very high cost if you go with the premier support. Um, and then it's kind of a myth that you don't need DBAs if you're deploying a managed database. You still do need DBA resources to be able to manage even managed DBAs. And overall, use cases supported. Um, so MySQL HA, DR, supported with Tungsten Clustering. HA is sort of supported in Azure, but the flexible server is in preview mode. Not really much in the way of support for DR, especially for flexible server at the moment. Zero downtime maintenance, again, that's Tungsten, but not Azure. And again, most managed services do not do zero downtime maintenance. Continuous operations, supported Tungsten clustering, Azure flexible server, that's in preview. MySQL, to have multiple primaries, one of the strengths of Tungsten clustering. That's not supported in Azure. And when we get down to having like active passive clusters, active clusters, or Geo-Scale clusters, that's something that Tungsten supports out of the box, but not a part of Microsoft Azure, at least not at the moment. So I've spoken about continuous solutions. Let's talk about our products just at a glance. We really have three main products, Tungsten Clustering, Replicator, and Dashboard. Uh, Tungsten Clustering, this is what we've talked about, right? Continuous MySQL operations, zero downtime maintenance. We deploy Geo-Scale. We deploy using multi-cloud or hybrid cloud technologies. We include an intelligent proxy that does automatic read-write splitting. And we support any version of MySQL. And again, that's MariaDB or Percona without any changes to your applications. So I've talked about our customer service and our support. Again, we have a 1 hour SLA for urgent cases. Those cases we track very closely. We end up really less than 3 minutes for our initial response. So that's why our customers are able to measure their uptime really in years. And um, we all have experience with cloud technologies, Linux, systems administrations, and site reliability engineering. Uh, so how does this translate into cost savings? Well, first of all, use whatever MySQL that you're used to using, right? If you want to use the free open source MySQL, that's fine. We fully support that. Um, you can choose which cloud environment you want to use um, because we run on any cloud environment. So if you get a deal with a particular cloud provider, feel free to use it. We run in any cloud provider. So that's one way as well that this optimizes your costs. And of course, downtime uh, can be looked at as a major expense. So we eliminate the risk for downtime and those costs, and that includes your maintenance operations. And DBAs can spend more time doing, what DBAs should be doing, improving the performance, rewriting queries, um, doing architecture, instead of, really menial activities like admin and recovery. So again, continuous MySQL operations. So we do HA. We've been doing this for 15 years, and our failover is immediate. So there's not an interruption to your business. And your MySQL recovery time now, if there is, any sort of catastrophic event, could be reduced to seconds, right? And our dashboard provides a graphical view and maintenance tool for all clusters, whether they're geo-distributed or not. And we'll look at that in a second too. With zero downtime MySQL, we can do site level and cross-site failover really quickly, right? This keeps your applications online and it keeps them from being disconnected as well. And that's because of the uh, Tungsten connector. This is great also for upgrading hardware, software, doing any OS patches, again, without taking your applications offline. And we're fully MySQL compatible, well, because we're using real MySQL underneath, and it's really whatever MySQL flavor you would like to use. Of course, one of our big strengths is the Geo-Scale MySQL. We can load balance MySQL read operations across multiple replicas. We can use replicas locally. We can use replicas deployed on a global level so that applications can read from a local replica. Again, geo-distributed MySQL clusters bring your data closer to your application users for better performance and faster response times. And you can add MySQL clusters for scaling. You can add MySQL nodes too as well if you want to do scaling that way to add more replicas for better response times for your reads. Uh, because we are agnostic when it comes to cloud or whatever sort of hardware is underneath, you could deploy in the cloud, you can deploy in VMs, you can deploy on-prem. You can mix and match clusters as well. You can have a geo-deployed cluster with one site, say in Amazon, one site in Google Cloud, and another site on-prem. It really doesn't matter. But you can also fail over and fail back from these different private and public clouds or whatever platform you're using. Um, and obviously, if a node or a provider or any sort of regional failure happens, it's easy to fail over to another site or another provider. Tungsten clustering includes an intelligent MySQL proxy that we call the Tungsten connector. And it really has a lot of features, but the important feature that we want to point out, at least in this context, is that it's traffic routing. It will route to a local primary. So if we have multiple primaries deployed in different sites, it'll route to the local primary, and it can route read applications or read queries to local read replicas. And during any sort of failover event or switch event, uh, applications are not disconnected. So your users still have a good experience even when a failover happens. And we can do kind of really cool replication with filtering, transforms in flight. Uh, if you want to use, say, replication to a non-MySQL target, we can do that. So you don't need ETL anymore. You can do real-time replication right into your analytics, and your analytics is up to date at all times. Um, and with the Tungsten Replicator, there's no charge for the amount of data or CPUs. It's just a pipeline. And we just replicate all the data from your cluster or your MySQL source to whatever target you choose. Again, this is a bolt-on application, so it's fully MySQL supported. We can use any sort of MySQL that you want, any flavor, no changes to your application. Just deploy and configure your MySQL cluster, and it's minutes. You use the same MySQL that you're familiar with. So whatever version that is that you want to use, that's what you can use. And there's no difference in your MySQL configuration. We do support SSL, which is extremely important. SSL for all in-flight traffic. So that could be your queries, replication traffic, or even the internal cluster communications, all SSL with encryption. And of course, native MySQL support. Another product too, we haven't really talked about it much, so I'll just go over it really quickly, is the Tungsten Replicator, right? And that allows us to replicate from MySQL to a bunch of targets, right? Again, we can actually replicate to Aurora or RDS, but more importantly, Redshift and analytic targets, right? Vertica, Hadoop, Kafka. There's a bunch, Cassandra, Elasticsearch. And this is really useful for multiple clusters. So for instance, if you have multiple MySQL clusters deployed and you need all the data and all these clusters to be merged into a single target, like say a Hadoop target or Vertica, the Tungsten Replicator can handle that for you. And it'll do all kinds of complex filtering. Typically when you're running analytics, you don't really need every single piece of data, right? Especially blob data. We can filter that out for you. So just the data that you need to get into your analytics gets replicated to your analytics. It's really flexible. There's a whole lot of filters that you can do and transformations of your data as well. And if you want to give it a shot, it's available actually as an AMI in the Amazon Marketplace. You could fire it up, and it'll prompt you with the sources targets, and it'll happily go along. So feel free to try it. Uh, One other target, just our product, just really quickly, uh, Tungsten Dashboard. This is our GUI management tool for Tungsten clustering. So with this, you see your entire cluster, even if it's geo deployed, you see all sites on a single page. You don't have to jump around between different sites. And you can do all your maintenance here. You can see our global transaction ID, the replication progress. You can switch. So switch a primary and a replica to promote a replica to primary. You can do failovers, and it also does monitoring as well. So this is a really powerful tool. And if you're using Tungsten clustering, it'll manage all of your clusters again on one single pane. And the best thing is it's included with Tungsten clustering. So you don't even have to pay extra for it. All the monitoring and everything is included. So if I can just talk about Continuent as a company real quickly. Again, we've been around for a while. It's been over 15 years already. And we only have experts here. Everyone is an expert on replication, databases, site reliability. Our support team, again, same sort of experience. Everyone on the support team has at least 20 years of database and high reliability experience. And that allows us to effectively respond to our customers' needs, questions, or even just to chat about architecture or technology. And of course, we're extremely proud that an urgent case we typically respond in less than 3 minutes. That is our average response time, less than 3 minutes. So that's another reason why our customers stick with us because they know when, if they have an issue or a question, even, they can get a hold of us. So here are some of our customers. And these customers have been with us for a long time, and it spans a lot of different industries: the medical industry, uh, finance, technology, telecommunications, and gaming, as well as some other industries. So we're pretty well represented in the enterprise space and software as a service space. And why do they choose Continuent, or why did they? Well, we've on all of our surveys, we have 100% customer satisfaction rate. And that is our goal. We're constantly thinking about our customers and we want that 100% customer satisfaction. And that's what we work for. Uh, Renewal rate, again, 97.5 and multi-year renewals. And of course, companies get bought out and they may have to adopt different technologies. They may even go off of MySQL. And so that would account for like the 2.5% that don't renew, but that's a pretty small percentage, and it's usually due to a buyout. Again, average response time less than 3 minutes for urgent case, and that helps fuel the 100% customer satisfaction rate. And our average customer has been with us for 7 years, so we do value a long-term partnership. That's another thing that we work for is that long-term partnership, we're not looking to, for a 6-month commitment and then say our goodbyes. And just some interesting facts. So we're the MySQL availability company, established in 2004, and I've mentioned some of the industries that are represented with our software. Um, but a couple interesting things. In 2014, we were actually acquired by VMware, and we were going to build the database as a service for vCloud Air, which was VMware's cloud offering solution. Uh, Unfortunately, VMware, or maybe fortunately, but VMware abandoned their vCloud Air, and so with that, Continuent broke away and became independent again from VMware. So it was kind of interesting being selected to work with VMware. So that's a pretty big company, pretty big player in the space, and we were quite glad to work with them. But now we're back on our own, and we decided to release some hardened security features in 2017, which is critical, especially in the cloud space. And in 2018, again, even more changes and more improvements to our multi-site clustering uh, offerings. And we saw our first 10-year anniversary this year. And now in the feature is cloud. So stay tuned for Tungsten Cloud. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. Again, my name is Matthew Lang, and there's my email address. Any questions, or you just want to chat about tech or anything else, feel free to drop me a line. Would love to talk to you. Have a great rest of your day, and make sure you see the rest of the High Noon series. Thank you.